budget presentation, November 26, 2019.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, council and staff. We're here to discuss, as a part of our budget process, revenues. As you know, in our last meeting with council on budget, we talked expenditures and the things that we looked at in terms of budget, and we hope to kind of quickly go through with you what we've come up with in terms of looking at projected revenues for the 2019 budget, and as well as us having done some research on potential untapped revenue sources, that's a lot of which are already on the books, and some proposed new revenue sources as we try to deal with a gap between revenue and expenditures. There is no action required of council tonight other than input, and we'll talk about process a little bit later on. I also wanted to make sure it be known, and President Sanders wanted to make sure it be known to the team that she is not late, and she isn't. She's actually got double duty and is attending an NAACP event, but is on her way here shortly to be a part of the discussion as well. So we'll get right to it in terms of where we are right now. Starting with just kind of a recount of where we are in the process. We had a budget workshop on October 27th. Since that time, we've been meeting also with NRN, National Resource Network, who's been working with us on these issues of sustainability around the budget. We know that's important to council. And the good news for us is that in all of the digging and researching we've done, we've been doing in terms of trying to put this document together, our numbers are pretty much in line with what NRN had discovered and shared with council in the discussions that they've had with you. So right now we're in this second workshop. On Thursday, on the 28th, I'm sorry, it was 28th and 29th, this is Wednesday and Thursday, we're actually going to be having 3 public meetings in order to give residents and other interested parties an opportunity to comment on the budget. We're going to take that input from our parties and then use that input to make final adjustments related to the budget. I will share with you that, again, as a part of this process, this isn't a public comment process. This is actually a staff workshop with council, and that public comment will be on those days, and then certainly on the days forward when we're doing official meetings related to the budget. Public will have the opportunity to come in then as well. So any documents that are produced to this point are really not even subject to open records, because there's not been any adoption of anything by council. These are just working papers, and so these numbers are kind of fluid. Go back, I'm sorry. Okay. So we're going to have a special council meeting on the 29th after we've had those public meetings, and at that point we'll do a formal presentation of a proposed budget based on all of the input. We'll share with you the input we got from those public sessions, and then ask council to, we'll put that budget in front of you. And at that point, we will, with council approval, actually post the budget both online and in the paper for public consumption, and in the conspicuous places, the library, and certainly here at Municipal Hall for public consumption, to get any feedback people want to give. And we'll take those comments and prepare that as well for council review. Then on December 10th, our schedule is to call a special council meeting where you would do the first motion budget reading and the motion to advertise the final budget for approval. With the 10-day period having passed, we would then go for adoption targeted at your December 18th meeting. So here we are in terms of what the budget trend has been since 2014. As you can see from a standpoint of budgets, the budgets have steadily increased basically along the lines of what benefits, salaries, contracted and negotiated benefits and salaries been, with some operational increase. I will say again, as I said in multiple years, from an operating standpoint, we really have operated pretty leanly over the course of those times. You'll note here that in 2013, I think was the year I came on board, and we had a 12.36 millage rate at that point. In 2014, to address the increase in costs, we brought that millage rate up to 12.7, and up until 2018, this current year's budget, we had not had a millage rate increase in some times. Last year represented about a 15.75 millage rate increase, which is again one of those concerns you have when you don't do gradual, steady increases based on what's happening inflation-wise or in the course of what's doing business. What we're looking at now is a budget proposal of $34,486,045. You can say $46.51. We initially had the budget higher when we started this, but as a part of our process of going back and taking a deeper look, we were able to decrease that initial October budget that we presented to you by $203,448. And we are operating from that new number in terms of the proposed budget now. So here's a breakdown for your information in terms of how departments and activities are funded, basically, and where the meat of your budget dollars are spent. Both police, insurance, debt service, public works, overhead, fire, the typical places where in local government you find the most costs related to an operation. From a departmental standpoint, these are your largest departments, so that's not unusual. What is a little unusual, and you've heard this before, when you talk about insurance and some of the pension costs, a lot of that is unusual in terms of the size of it. Large part of what that has to do with is property liability insurance increases that have been kind of steadily increasing over the course of the last several years. And we've been doing some things to try to address that, but we are operating in local government environment, particularly an urban one, where a simple trip and fall, as I shared with you a few months back, one trip and fall ended up costing us, even though it wasn't something we were responsible for. It was really a private property issue, but it was on the sidewalk. We were named in the suit, and the judge made an award of $500,000 for one trip and fall. So obviously that then impacts what our property insurance rates, our liability insurance rates are going to do. And so we saw like a $100,000 increase in over last year to this year. So those kind of things are unusual in terms of it impacting us. But for the most part, you look at the administrative overhead again, we have an unusually high, not I guess for Pennsylvania, but we do have a high pension expense, largely because we're catching up from the recession and back in 2009 and trying to make up that difference. We have been steady and continue to be steady and continue to budget for our scheduled pension payments, but that's a big part of our budget. We pay out also about $4 million a year also in debt service payments. So again, a large part of that debt service payment is around some borrowing related to trying to catch up pension back in the day. Okay, this is just kind of another breakdown of that same information, and it kind of shows you again where we're looking at in terms of expenditures last year or the current year versus where we look at where we anticipate expenditures are going to be in the projected in the next year. I'm going to not talk about most of these, but I did want to point out a few things that we saw and why some of the numbers are what they are in terms of the percentage change. Starting with human resources, you'll see a 5.8% piece there. One of the things we're proposing to do with the human resources budget this year is actually to try to incentivize performance in the organization. I think council has been really good about recognizing the hard work of the team, but we also want to recognize some of the leadership team, but we also want to recognize innovation and hard work in the ranks. And so from non-departmental staff, so what we did was put in a proposal for a performance bonus piece through a new rewards recognition program we're trying to do for staff to incentivize innovation and performance in the organization. Because it's such a small budget in public, in human resources, we're talking about $10,000, and $10,000 makes a 5.8% increase in their budget. When you look down at the recreation and IT budget, you see a 16.3% increase. As you all recall, we did purchase the former PAL building and are doing the renovations now to make that a recreation center. Most of this cost is associated really with taking the utilities and other overhead costs for that facility. Last year it was budgeted in the public works budget. And we actually now, since they have their own facility this year, we're putting it actually in the Parks and Recreation budget. So it's not new costs. It's actually, most of it is redistributed costs from the 2018 budget now being assessed to recreation, so we can better track going forward what those costs are going to be. And code enforcement, one of the things we're doing, that 9.1% increase is around really two items. One is because of council's desire that we do more to address some of the unsafe and vacant structures, we did increase. We usually have about a $50,000 budget that we propose to take down dilapidated and unsafe structures. We did increase that amount, and that results in what that 9.1% is in mainly, and there's also some additional training that Amrinder had shared with you all in the earlier budget presentation that he wants to do with the staff. So that represents that. And then finally, in the public works, you see a 3.3% increase, and that's really around the issue that we've been talking about, trying to deal with stormwater issues. We spend a lot of our public works budget now in terms of dealing with sinkholes and pipe repair and other things related to stormwater. So we added some additional funds in the budget to address a growing number of stormwater issues. The good news is that we are looking forward, as you are, and investigating, and we'll be presenting in the first quarter of next year some information to council to consider looking at a stormwater utility so that we don't peel off money from the public works budget that is not targeted for stormwater. And also, it's a much more fair approach into it in terms of assessing stormwater costs to all users, both nonprofit and for-profit, which through the tax system you definitely can't do. All right. Any questions to this point? Okay, if there are none, so what we're looking at now is an overall, based on this budget we have before you, is about, you can turn the page first, is about a $569,000, almost $570,000 increase over last year's proposed budget. Of that increase, we'll look at personnel costs. Most of that just contracted labor agreements for the majority of the staff who are labor employees. Some operational costs increases, as well as insurance costs related to the budget. So, and the salary increases of that personnel, the salary increase will make up almost 60% of those, and then other benefits around personnel costs as well. So that's the majority of the budget. From you look at the expenditures, again, it's broken out into all the other areas on the pie chart as to where those increases are primarily going. And again, when it's personnel, that's what you deal with. Next slide. So let's look at our revenue trend, which is really what this session is really talking about. Basically, what you've seen in over the last few years, and we started in 2016 to look at what our actual revenue has been, and it's kind of been trending down. And so we had proposed last year that for the current year's budget, that we were going to bring in about 33.8, almost 33.9 million dollars in revenue. So what we're looking at now is, again, for a number of reasons that we're gonna be talking about. The revenue stream seems to be going down. Large part of that tends to be, or some part of that tends to be, that what we're seeing, and as you know, a number of reassessments, and our assessed valuation overall this year went down again. We expected that it would go up with the amount of development that's going on in town, but it actually went down from about 8.79 to about 8.75. So and that's 879 million and some change to 875 million for the overall assessment. I will say, and just kudos to the school district, they have done a good job of at least challenging a lot of the assessments that have come forth in court. A lot of them we don't prevail in, but they do challenge them, trying to hold things steady. We still believe that with all the redevelopment that's going on around town, and all of the property purchases that are going on around town, that the longer term picture for property assessment and valuations in the municipality have to go up. You can't have all of this stuff going on in the community, and we continue to see a downturn in what our property valuations are. So what, in projecting this revenue, we looked at basically what we see is about a 1.784 difference in what we think will generate in revenue versus what we think is going to cost in the next year to actually operate the government. And we want it to be, again, we always err on the side of being very, very conservative about this. So when we were scrubbing our numbers and we were going through all the detail that we had provided you in the expenditure portion last year, we scrubbed all the revenue numbers, and based on what we were seeing, we didn't want to puff this up and fluff it. We wanted to be real stringent and conservative in terms of what our estimates are. And again, this isn't something that you guys haven't seen before, because in the discussions with the NRN, and they were in every one of our sessions and several of your sessions, that's the number that you're seeing too. That's around the number that we were seeing in terms of the deficit, deficit between revenues and expenditures that we have to deal with. So let's talk about some of those things now. So again, when you look at the revenue breakdown of where we get the majority of our revenue, of course, is taxes, both property and local enabling taxes. There are other sources of revenue we get, but those are the tax portion, as you can clearly see, makes up over 70% of our revenue, almost 80% of our revenue. Some of the big things you see in there in terms of, beyond that, you look at waste collection, which is really more of a pass-through than anything else. We do have to take in the revenue the residents pay for trash, but we pass that revenue on to Mascara as well. We did go back and look at the culture and recreation. That's pretty much recreation department of revenue. Last year, as we looked at the detail of that in this current year, we actually found what we were a little too aggressive in our projections, and I think that aggressiveness wasn't unrealistic. I think it just was a lack of performance in trying to get the revenue we thought we should be able to get. So we peeled that back slightly, but we think that we got a realistic number now in front of us. Some of the things you look at in terms of revenue as well is the miscellaneous revenue. we looked at that $541 million. Miscellaneous revenue is really insurance, and it's really kind of a false positive in terms of revenue, because it's really when we have insurance claims for vehicles and things like that, and we get a check back, we basically take that revenue and put it back into the operation. We've lost a vehicle, so usually the net negative is we end up having to spend more for a vehicle. We just get some revenue back from the insurance coverage that we have on that vehicle, and we plug it back in. And so we're going to, we brought that number down a little bit as well to reflect that. So you see in the detail that we provide that that number will be slightly less than what it was in the year before. Are there any questions about it? Yes. Okay. So let's look at the revenues 18 versus 19, and this again is kind of a reiteration of that. We've again, property taxes we know are going down. Local enabling taxes, we see a slight increase in that. Business permit, we see a significant decrease in that. And I put a note down here. Oh, and that really is based on the fact that last year we thought we'd do more with public works permit revenue, and that $110,000 number is actually a lot more closer to what we're tracking at, and so we want to see. Now there's some things that we're going to be proposing again in terms of revenue sources that may impact that in a positive way, as well as some of the other things. That's some of the feedback we want to get from you all in terms of how to move forward with that. The pilot payments in lieu of taxes, you can see that's 44%, one that we're taking down. One of the things we had talked about and discussed during last year was sending out basically requests to nonprofits, to 229 nonprofits in town that don't pay any taxes, to give a voluntary contribution because they get services whether they pay taxes or not. We actually had that process got started, but it never got finished. And so our plan is that we will do that with the distribution of taxes in 2019 for 2019 taxes. But again, because that's a voluntary ask, didn't want to be too aggressive in that. I wanted to be really, really conservative, and if there's something that's going to come in as a result of that voluntary ask, we'll take it, but I don't count on nonprofits to a large extent saying, hey, we're going to give you anything significantly to contribute, recognizing one, that a lot of them have funding challenges and won't be able to do it to a large degree. We also looked at, in terms of revenues, in that miscellaneous category, again, that's taking money back that we got in terms of insurance fees, and actually making it more realistic in terms of what actually is revenue and what actually is reimbursement for an asset that we actually had. So that should be it. I think that's the only other one I wanted to chat about in that. Any questions related to that? Okay, so let's talk about now some of the options that we're going to be going through in a few minutes for revenue generation. One I just talked about was that whole pilot issue and the voluntary request. We're going to be aggressive about that. The second one is on the revised fee structures. We're going to be talking in a few seconds about both the charging for block party applications. It's not going to bring in a lot of revenue, but it's something as we look at revenue sources and we comb this, again, not just us, but in working with NRN about what other communities around the country, around the state do. Looking at new programs and overhauling the parking permits for the new recreation department. We think it makes sense. One of the things we recognize that's happened over the years with parking, with recreation especially, is that we missed a lot of opportunities for revenue collection. Some of it is endemic to how we have it set up. For instance, if we say, anything under 19 is free, guess how many under 19 applications we get to utilize our facilities? Everything is under 19. And then we end up with 100 people showing up. So we're looking at revising that structure. Some permit fees and application fees that we haven't been collecting, both in police and fire, and also some in public works, and to increase some fees, and then some code enforcement calculations as well. I'm gonna, at that point, bring the team members up to talk about their respective proposals. I'll start off again with the pilot that you know. Right now, we got about 56 basically non-paying property owner entities, properties in town. 20 belong to the county, 7 belong to the school district, but the large majority, 229, are just nonprofits in general that are not taxable bodies. And so there's about 1.2 million and 1.26 million of revenue that has been uncaptured. That's largely where we're going to go after contributions for folks to contribute for the services that they provide, and we'll see what happens in that. One of the things, you can go to the next page. The other things that we want to look at is this. I know block parties are an important part of what happens around Norristown. And one of the things we want to make sure we bring to everybody's attention, while there historically hasn't been a cost to applicants who come and want to hold a block party, there has been costs to the municipality for conducting it. Not only the administrative cost that a block party application is ultimately requiring the chief to sign off, the police chief, the fire chief, the public works director, me, and their staffs and mine to undergo some level of work to get it from soup to nuts and to get it done. Not including the cleanup of folks who don't do what they're supposed to do afterwards. We haven't had a whole lot of block parties, so that's why I say it's not a whole lot of revenue generated, but we think, again, if you get in the mindset of that there's a cost associated with providing a service. We just think proposing a fee of $50 non-recoverable, non-refundable for the permit would help the cause of offsetting the cost of government. And so we're proposing that as a possible fee change for council's consideration. I also want, now Thomas, I'll let you come up, you can go to the next page. Any questions about the block party, please? Thomas. We want to come up now and talk a little bit about what we're talking about with changes in permit fees for public works. And it's basically, I can start it off if you want, Thomas, and you can answer any questions that come up if that's what you like. But basically, when we do street openings, right now we charge $160. That's been the cost for quite some time. And Thomas has proposed we increase that to $174. When we have to do anything with folks who come and get permits for utility pole work, and that's utility companies, the average cost, well, what we've been charging is $60 a pole, $60 for the pole, then $5 for the permit, and $5 for each pole that's involved in that particular permit. We're proposing that fee go to $100 for the permit itself, and then $20 for each pole that's involved in that particular permit. There's not a whole lot of fees, in planning and development. The one thing that we do, we know from time to time that we get requests for murals, and there's a process, an administrative process that goes through doing mural requests as well for new murals. So what we were proposing is If there was a request to do a mural on a single-family resident, don't expect that normally would happen. $50 if there was one for multifamily, $100, and if there was a commercial request on a commercial building to put up a mural, that we then institute a $150 fee for that. Now, any questions related to that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are these comparable to the rest of the cities around in the area?
Yes, yes, and one of the things we not only looked, everybody jumps to Philly, we don't jump to Philly quickly, but we look at other areas and they do. Again, the whole thing is you guys are now spending so much time researching and traveling to do research. It's about recovery for the services that Chris provided. And so both in our conversations with the National Resource Network as well around the sustainability issue, and that was the encouragement, start looking at your services and what you provide. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
What's involved with the mural?
Well, it actually requires a review by planning and development because it really becomes a zoning issue in terms of whether a mural can be put up. There are particular standards that in terms of size and murals, et cetera. So there's actually staff time that's investigated to make sure and validate that the end result is a mural that, one, the community supports, and two, that meets the specific requirements of the code. Right? Thank you. Oh, okay, we went to code. You can go to code. All right, so Amrinder is a little hurt right now, so I don't want to, I'm trying to tell him not to stand up, so you can actually pull the chair up and sit down so you don't have to stand up.
I'm good for now.
Okay.
I'm good. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Jones.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. The fees that I'm proposing to change the fees that I'm proposing to change in 2018, for the 2019 year are, number one, a new building permit pricing schedule. I understand that the process was looked at a few years back where there was a new fee schedule put together for building permits, whether commercial or residential. One of the things that I would recommend to tweak on this is the permit fees for residential construction projects. The reason why I say that is right now, a basic permit involving one inspection for a project, whether it's building, plumbing, mechanical, ends up being $99.50. That's with the current fee structure of $70 minimum, $25 application, and then the state required $4.50 permit fee. I'm proposing to change that minimum $70 to $100, only because, and just to share some statistics, so far in 2018, we've issued 552 residential permits at the rate of $99.50, which is approximately 36% of all the permits that have been issued so far in 2018. And in 2017, we've issued 494 residential permits at the rate of $99, which was about almost 41% of all permits issued. Now, this fee is relatively low compared to our overhead costs. That's why I wanted to reflect the new rate as part of what it costs the administrative side of processing a permit application and staying on top of that permit application as far as making sure the contractor submits their insurance to us once it's ready to lapse, follow up, make sure they're scheduling their necessary inspection appointments and all of that, and then also the inspection side of it. So what would pretty much happen is a residential permit fee would go from $99.50, $70, $25, $4.50, and it would go to $100, $25 administrative fee, and then the required $4.50 state fee. So there's a little bit of a jump there, but it's to reflect the actual cost that it costs the Norristown Codes Department to process and have these projects inspected. So that was one of the first proposals for updating the fee. The second item is, yes, sir.
So you have $100 fee for both commercial and residential? You just want one flat?
Yes, well, what would happen is, this proposed $100 fee would be for, correct, commercial and residential, but for the residential construction and any new, for any new residential construction and any commercial activities, we would use the scale that we have right now, determined on the project value of the project. Usually it's the residential projects that kind of underreport what the cost of the project is. And, you know, they might report that it's gonna cost me $1,000 to do this job because my friend's helping me do the work and I have materials laying around. So we might have to go out there 3 times, but we only have literally $99.50 collected for that project. So it costs the municipality more time, it costs the municipality more over time for that permit than what they're actually reporting. So that's why we wanted to go away from residential properties having that scale where it would be minimum $100, and then also the application with the $25 admin fee and the $450.
Do we have a violation fee? In regards, like, so you go out there and you say, they didn't tell you the material that they had. You go and they're using something else and you're like, well, this is what I had on paper. Is there a violation? Because that's wasting our time.
Sure. So we have a re-inspection fee. So let's say if we went to a project to go check the footers or the framing and they failed because 1 or 2 things didn't meet the code requirement or any of the work didn't meet code requirement, there actually currently is a re-inspection fee. It's a smaller fee, and I actually didn't propose that during this update because, as you know, we are working on that comprehensive update at the codes department. So once we have all of those new fees introduced for the different services that we're already providing, but we're actually not charging any fees for that, I was gonna incorporate that re-inspection fee at that time. But at this time, I definitely feel that for the residential projects, we need to increase that fee because majority of the time, people are underreporting what the actual cost is, and we're not actually collecting enough to be able to cover the multiple times we need to go to the property to inspect it. And also to stay on top of those projects to make sure that they're closing them out.
Are you finding out that we're having multiple violations in regards sometimes? Because, you know, what we have is the unions that's looking at this information.
Yes, sir.
You know, so are we finding a lot of discrepancies when you?
So I have I brought my monthly report with me just in case, but I believe right now there's only about 20% of the time when we go to these projects where people are failing those inspections. But once again, before we even go back to them, we do make them pay the re-inspection fee before we head back out there. But there are projects where people are, where we have to go multiple times, and that's part of the code updates that we're looking to propose to you guys as well, where contractors would not only just pay a license fee currently like they have to and show us proof of insurance, we would actually test them like we used to back in the day, and as other municipalities do, to make sure that they actually can comprehend the code book and they're actually qualified and they understand the codes, and it's not just, they're just paying a fee and be able to get a contractor's license. So hopefully with doing that in the future, that's also going to scale down the amount of times we have to go back to a property and keep failing it until they actually pass, because those contractors in the future are going to be tested on whichever trade they wish to work on.
Derek, I'll add that I know one of the things that's in here that's of concern to council is the whole issue of contractors working without a license. And what we're proposing with this budget is that that fee be double what the permit is. If we find out that they are working without a license, that they double what the permit fee is.
I just think as a create a culture that has always happened in Norristown where people is trying to get over on the system.
Sure.
So, you know, to me, you know, and I said this to you before, I'd rather clean it up now than for it to keep going on so you guys don't have to work as hard. That's just my take.
I appreciate that. And we're definitely cracking down on job sites where we observe work is going on and permits are not pulled. So we're definitely cracking down on that, and people know about that. So what we're actually getting more phone calls now of people double checking to make sure something doesn't require a permit before they start it, because they don't want to end up getting citations or end up being accused of working without a permit because they may or may not have known that that item needed a permit. And part of the outreach that we're doing, we do have a list of registered contractors with us right now. Before the end of this year and early next year, we're actually going to be sending all of them a letter along with their renewal reminder that these are the type of projects that require permits and you need to contact us first. So we're going to continue to do the outreach and educate these contractors, but we're also going to continue to crack down on the ones that are purposely doing things wrong and trying to get away with pulling permits. On the next sheet, on the next slide here is for, like as Mr. Jones just mentioned, the contractor licensing. Right now, we just have one fee for the entire year, and then we have one additional $10 increasement if you do it after February 1st. So one of the things that I looked at, and other municipalities use the same practice too, they usually scale the contractor licensing fee depending on which quarter of the year they're applying for it. Because more than likely, if somebody's going to do work at the end of the year, and they're more than likely not going to apply for that license because they feel like they're paying for the whole year, but they're only working in Norristown for 1 month or 2 months. So this was one of the proposals that we have a prorated fee, and I think we'll be able to get more voluntary compliance with the contractors for actually applying for their contractor licensing with us, because they'll see this scaled rate instead of having to pay the one fee for the whole year. And then also, as Mr. Jones mentioned, if somebody gets caught working without a license and even a permit in Norristown, the fee would be doubled. And that's what we're proposing, and we're going to be aggressively enforcing that. If somebody says, I didn't know I needed a license, we're actually reaching out to, when we do our outreach, all of the contractors associations, builders associations, to spread the word and let them know that in Norristown, if you're going to be doing any commercial activity, you need to have your contractor's license. Yes, Councilwoman.
Do you think that it's worthwhile reaching out to the realtors as well? Because sometimes when realtors sell a house, obviously there's going to be possibly renovations done to that house before the people move in. So is it a possibility to include notification of the realtors as well?
I totally agree. I think that would be a very great idea, because not only can we share about what needs a permit with them, but we can also share with them the requirements for our property transfers when properties change hands in Norristown, and also educate them on, hopefully, the proposal with this next item here with the rental license fee increasement too. So I think it would be great to kind of blend all of that together, contractor licensing requirement, what and how property transfers are conducted in Norristown, and also the rental registration and inspection program. And then that way we can educate all of the realtors that are working in Montgomery County as well.
What about the banks and the county also, that they sell these buildings? That would be a good idea.
I'm definitely going to put that down, and we'll definitely include that as part of our outreach that we're going to be doing at the end of this year, early next year. That way we can kind of get everyone on the same page. The next item was, so that was the contractor licensing. I'm proposing and requesting that we have that prorated rate. Now for going back to plan review fees, that's also part of the building permit slide that we just went through. Our current fees are $70 for residential and $110 for commercial. I wanted to change that to $75 for residential and $125 for commercial to reflect the actual cost and overhead, once again, that it costs the Norristown Codes Department to have these plan reviews performed. That way we are actually recouping all of the money that's being spent for these services. So that was a proposed fee update for that. And then the big one is going to be the rental license pricing. Right now our fee schedule is $65 per unit. I was requesting to bump that up to $75, only because, number one, it's currently not covering the actual cost on the administrative side and the inspection side to manage these 10,000 plus rental units. So with the increase of $10 only, it's going to help with the cost of all of the, as we're putting together this program, it's going to help with the cost of the multiple outreach that we're going to do, as far as sending out friendly reminder letters and then actual citations and actual letters, notices of violations. So it's definitely going to increase the administrative side with these rental properties, the ones that are in non-compliance. So by increasing this fee, it's gonna overall help with the cost that it's gonna take on the administrative side and the inspection side to go to the properties, to perform the inspection, to create the inspection reports, to, give them to the property owner, mail them out, do all of that. And I try to ask a couple of the team members of when we last looked at our rental license pricing, and I couldn't get a clear answer on when exactly we had our $65 fee put together. But to honestly reflect the cost that Norristown Codes has, the $75 fee would be more realistic. Yes, Councilwoman?
I can give you a little history on the $65 fee. Back in 2001, I believe, we tried to bump the rental fee up to $110, and there was an active landlord association at that time, and they sued us for the increase because it was basically double. The judge at that point, when they did the case, said that we could not make a profit on the rental license fees that we were charging. It had to basically encompass the costs that we had in doing those rental licensing and the inspections and all of that. So I don't know if that's going to happen again. It's $75, but that's basically why that went back to the $65.
Okay.
And I think it was around that time frame.
Okay. Well, definitely since 2001, it's the operating costs for the municipality have significantly increased. And the $75, I can literally break that down by the minute, how long it takes the administrative staff and the inspection side of the staff to conduct these inspections and stay on top of it. And definitely will be a little bit more than $75 what it costs the municipality to have these operations. But I feel comfortable that a $75 fee, for example, for a single family dwelling, or if it's a multi-unit building, it's a realistic fee, and it's comparable to other municipalities, but at the end of the day, it's comparable to what the actual cost is for the municipality to stay on top of these rentals and inspect them. And these were the only proposals at this time that I was recommending. As you know, we're working on that comprehensive update. During that time, there's going to be introduction of new fees for the different services that we have, but that'll come together with those code updates. But these are the fees that we currently have on the books. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, right now our no-show fee and no-entry fee is $30. I wanted to increase that penalty to $100. Right now what's happening is, once we do our initial inspection, the property owner has 45 days. Sometimes they'll forget to come back for the reinspection because they haven't done the work yet, and they'd rather pay that $30 no-show fee than have us come back and start citing them for non-compliance. If it's $100, it might help with their voluntary, with them voluntarily letting us back into the property to make sure that the violations have been corrected. So I wanted to increase that fee penalty for the no-shows and the no-entry. And then other than that, there were no other proposed updates from the codes department. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, come on, Mr. Genuardi, let you do your thing.
Stay on the table. All right, so first thing I kind of noticed when I can see, I know my toes. First thing, as Mr. Crandall was talking about, is it's a lot easier in looking through other townships, like you were talking about before, going to an hourly rate. So when I went and looked at how our park fees are and the upcoming recreation center and the rental of rooms, the gymnasium, I'm moving to propose an hourly rate. This is kind of an average of taking, we were a little all over the place. I looked at all of the neighboring municipalities, townships in Montgomery County, and there wasn't so much of a trend, so I kind of went average. But I also feel that would work well with our community. I still want to keep the deposit because this way it kind of holds people to something. So 1 to 4 hours, resident, non-resident fee, that same $25 deposit, they will get that back per how they left the area. If the area, we have in the policy, I'm also rewriting the application process. And in it says, clean up after yourself, leave as you've seen, you'll receive that back. Pavilion fee didn't change. It was before a standard one-time flat rate of $100. So if you would like the pavilion and one park, again, same flat rate fee. At the bottom, something I noticed when I first started is there were different communities that were like camps, who would charge their campers to come, but they're using our facilities. So something I'm going to try and get a little more stringent with is organizations that are found using the park for paid program without a permit, we charge double the fee. Because if you're coming to use our facility and you have 150 plus kids for something that you're charging them for, we need to kind of follow up with that. So I'm moving to push that in place. I'm also kind of moving forward in just a few small things. A couple of times this past summer I ran into large events. I am categorizing an event averaging about 100 plus people. I am working with police, where I would like to make security a priority if you do have an event or have a larger group, to having a police presence there if needed, because there's a couple situations that it might be a great book bag drive, awesome, I'm into it, but I have 300 people showing up. So we have to be conscious of how we're using the parks. With the new recreation center, here's what I'm proposing. I'm keeping it the same hourly rates for a gymnasium, 1 to 4, 5 to 8 hours. For classrooms or multi-purpose rooms, that's what I would go to, again, an hourly kind of a rate, resident, non-resident, and I know profits, not-for-profits will also look to have different events or types of programming in there. I also added an AV fee. If somebody comes and they want to have, Boy Scout troop wants to rent out a space and they need projection, they need computers, we can provide that now. So I think that if you're going to use our equipment and be responsible for it, again, it holds the person accountable. Well, any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are the recreation center rental fees sort of in line with, I guess, like an average of what other townships in the county are doing as well?
Yes. And I also kind of based it on calling around, not necessarily neighboring recreation municipalities, but calling to renting our own community. We wanted to rent, not necessarily the school district because it's a little different, but open spaces in our own community kind of went in between. Again, I averaged everything, what I think would be a best fit for us. And it would also hold, people, it's going to be a newly renovated facility, so with them paying this fee, they're going to keep the space clean, they're going to clean up their area, they're going to make sure that the policies and procedures that I write are going to be followed through. Great.
All right, good. All right, thank you so much. So, council, I wanted to reiterate again, you've seen this also in terms of what our fund balance has been doing and is projected to do if we continue without trying to find models to sustain ourselves and actually start now looking at ways to generate revenue and cut costs. I think we have, again, over the years, been very, very effective at cutting costs operationally. All of our departments are pretty much operating at near, with adjustments for inflation, the same budgets, operational budgets they've had since 2014 with adjustments for inflation. So as you can see right now, we have a pretty healthy, almost $8 million fund balance, which is our savings account. And people keep trying to confuse a lot of folks try to confuse what that is surplus. It's not, if you pinch away at it, as you know, every year it's not surplus. If you need it to carry you to the next year, it's not surplus, it's just fund balance. if we do nothing, what you've seen as shown to you by the National Resource Network is that by 2023, we will have up to 2021 have depleted the fund balance to so low that even when we come out of the projected cost of having to pay for all of our indebtedness, we still wouldn't have a fund balance that meant anything, which then puts us, I would say, right around 2020 is what I'm most concerned about, because if you get, as you get to that $5 million and below point, you start having these conversations about, do you need to borrow money through a tax anticipation note to make sure you have enough liquidity in your budget to keep the government operating. So the one thing that we don't want to do is get there. We haven't been there. I think way back in the day that might have been some conversation. We haven't been there. So we, as you know, have to address how we do that. How do we avoid this scenario? And this scenario is that they looked at and presented to us as if, okay, and assuming that there'll never be another borrowing again in Norristown, and that's not true. Governments borrow money all the time. We just have to be in a position in terms of a fund balance standpoint to be able to have the kind of credit rating that we have now, that you can borrow at very low interest like we do now. And so this, a large part of our work is trying to deal with that. And you can see where our debt service is and that it's going to be going down. But if you look at it, if we track the same way we're tracking now without dealing with the revenue issue, we won't have a whole lot of debt service in 2023, but we also won't have a whole lot of fund balance in 2023 either, which at that point, probably since 2021, for sure, we'd be doing annual tax anticipation notes to borrow to make payroll and keep stuff going, waiting on tax revenue, which you don't want to be in that position. So here we are to the next page. We want to talk a little bit about how do we get out of this. And I think we knew going into our discussions with the National Resource Network and looking at the feasibility of how we can move forward. We all kind of anticipated, as they did, that certainly for 2019, we were going to have some degree of fund balance reliance in doing this, because you're not going to create all of this new revenue and create all of this new development overnight. The good news is the development continues. We'll see over the course of the next year. You should see Lafayette completed. You should see serious discussion in terms of design, et cetera, for the turnpike, and you'll see what even more aggressively what we're seeing now is property movements in the downtown area and other places in town in anticipation of that. And so what we'll see, there are other future developments. We know, for instance, that Sarah's looking at yet another project in terms of single-family development, and you had, we're working to schedule this economic development workshop with you so that you'll see that there is a lot of action. And I think that as those things start to unfold, the county campus will move a little bit beyond the reskinning project, but they'll spend a lot of next year doing the reskinning of that building. You'll start seeing a little bit more movement in terms of property values and assessed values of properties, and maybe we'll get some additional tax release to help offset that. In the meantime, for 2019 and how we get there, I have a few options that we put on the table, and there are iterations of these options as well. One would be, remain at the 14.7 millage rate increase, with no millage rate increase, and keep it there. If we do so, then we're talking about taking basically that 1.7, almost 1.8 million, and just eating it in fund balance. So there wouldn't be an immediate impact on taxpayers in terms of us doing that, but certainly long range, it would make that impact much more probable in terms of an even larger tax increase to try to sustain ourselves. Option two would be to utilize a portion of it, and we propose maybe increase the millage rate to 15.2, which would give us a revenue increase of $423,000 from that millage rate increase, which is basically a half a mil, and use the rest for reserves, which would give us then $6.5 million left in reserves, and would result in essentially the average homeowner would see about a $44.42 increase in their municipal tax over 2018 as a result. The third option would be, if you want to try to absorb as much of it as you could, in a 1 mil increase, which would generate about $846,000. We'd still use reserves, but we'd end up with about $400,000 more in reserves than going the half mil route. So those are the options that we kind of put on the table again for your thought in terms of where we're looking at. We have to go. We know that if we're going to do anything to protect our sustainability, we're going to have to deal with the issue of protecting reserves as much as possible from a cash flow standpoint, and as well as a catastrophic issue standpoint. The other thing also that as you'll note is we have that AA- rating because one of the things you have in place is a reserve policy, and have demonstrated, particularly in 2018, the willingness of this body to make the necessary steps to generate revenue, which is what rating agencies look at significantly as a part of how they evaluate you for credit worthiness, is that the elected body makes the kind of decisions that are fiscally sound. So that's what we have on the table tonight in terms of how to meet the 2019 revenue gap as far as some options. And again, we're not asking you necessarily to make any decision on any of those three tonight, but certainly over the course of the next week or so, any feedback you all want to shoot to me individually in terms of your thoughts about it, I'll include that into our projections, and as we get ready for that next presentation to you, and we'll have taken in citizen input. We'll come back with a presentation in terms of a direction and have a better sense of where you want to go. Any questions, any thoughts you want to share? All right. Well, thank you so much for your attention to this, and we'll get some information out to you as we get more. We'll keep it coming to you. Thank y'all so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.